just do a brief introduction and then pass you over to dear James. We'll just do our usual introduction. And you know that here's your team. You see them every time, so you know who we all are. You know, you have dear John Higginbottom, really whose brainchild this work is myself, Regina, and Manny I mentioned is in the background doing some great technical things. Jordan is the person who really helped us set up a lot of this platform. So when it works, we're just so happy with Jordan, and then when it doesn't work so good, we're having a little panic and being on the call to Jordan. But we're very grateful for his technical support as well, and Jen, who's I mentioned in the room with me. So this is your team this morning, so we are very happy to welcome you to our session today. And you know, Advanced Practice is originally funded by the Ministry of Health to provide leadership, education and guidance to mental health field to help develop and put effective evidence-based psychosocial rehabilitation practices into place. We are so grateful to each and every one of you who come to our sessions and to those people who courageously present in this format, and to just acknowledge that they do all that work without really any financial remuneration. So very, very grateful to them for that. And a little note here about accessing archived webinars. So at this point, we have about 50 archived webinars. So they may be tools that you may want to use in your work to promote discussion or advance the work that you're doing. So feel free to use those. They are free, as you know, and hopefully they're a good resource for you and your team. So that's a little bit about us. Also, I just want to do a shout out to Douglas College, who have indeed really supported this work over the last several years, financially and otherwise. So I just want to say a big thank you to them as well. And this slide, of course, is really about what we think our work is, and I'm sure you've seen that many times before, but just really do want to acknowledge all that good support that our president, Dr. Kathy Denton, gives us, and many other staff along the way, including our evaluation people, Laura Sandave, who develops our evaluation each and every week. So thank you to Laura for helping us collect that information and interpret that information from you, and for you for sending in your feedback to us. That's really very much appreciated. And as Douglas College, we wish to acknowledge the Coquitlam and Kikwa First Nations, as well as all Coast Salish peoples on whose traditional and unceded territory we live, learn, play and work. So we just want to make that acknowledgement. To remind you that we have transitioned to that new email platform. So Jen has been working very hard to make sure that we're gathering all of our contacts. So if you haven't had a chance to sign up, please do let us know. And please do check your promotion folders in case you haven't heard from us. So just a little note to that effect as well. So we need you. We need your presence, and we need your feedback. So this is our best way to stay in touch with you and let you know what's going on. So thanks for doing that. And I did mention Laura Sandev and her team here at Douglas College, who help us with the evaluation. And so you will receive a webinar. After the webinar, you'll receive a link that asks you to give us some feedback. And we did note that after our last session, which we were very proud of, we didn't have any feedback. So we will send that link as well again this time to you. So your feedback really does mean a lot to us. This is a note for Jen, just to that PSR Canada is undergoing a survey, so we really want to hear from you. Please do consider taking a few minutes to fill out that survey, because we really want to know how best we can serve you. So just with that partnership with PSR Canada and Advanced Practice, we really want to hear from you. And so thanks to Jen, she's given us the link there in the chat. Hopefully you'll see that. So if you can just cut and paste and then fill in that evaluation or feedback link, we'd really like to hear from you. So that's PSR Canada asking us to just disseminate that information. Also, we had some information from some colleagues in Fraser Health who were speaking about a upcoming session, and towards the end of the session I will remind myself to give you details about that as well. But in the meantime, to let you know that we do have funding to provide webinars until the end of August. And do let us know in this chat box if you have any ideas for future webinars. So we had a conversation with people yesterday who said that they'd like very much to hear a little bit more about psychosocial rehabilitation and concurrent disorders. So we're going to work on that for sure in the next couple of months, but there may be other ideas as well that you maybe want to present yourself or you would like to hear about. So please let us know. This is a little note to let you know about an upcoming webinar in May. So we have the great privilege of hearing from the Hearing Voice movement here in British Columbia. We're going to hear from some people who run some of the groups and people who participate in some of the groups, and to learn a little bit about sort of upcoming literature, to learn a little bit about the different structure of groups that occur, and then the opportunity to hear from 2 program participants as well. So a really neat opportunity to learn a little bit more and maybe inspire different communities to begin hearing voice groups that people have found extremely successful. So come join us for that session. It promises to be really good as well. And so it is my great pleasure to turn you over now to James Price, who describes himself as having a Métis background himself. He describes himself also as being an agent for positive social change and greater hope and understanding for us all. As a community mental health worker and a PSR expert in employment and development, he strives to facilitate growth and illumination in the hearts and minds of his participants. James believes that it's important for psychosocial rehabilitation practitioners and promoters to always be welcoming, engaging, empowering in our journey with individuals, families, and communities. And what James is going to offer us today is really the opportunity to maybe have some dialogue around psychosocial rehabilitation, principles, values, competencies, and how they intersect with Indigenous ways of being and Indigenous approaches to health. So it is a real honor and a privilege to have James with us today. And we're just going to switch over, thank you Jen, to just going to ask James as well to please turn on his camera and his audio.
Good morning. Thank you everyone for attending. Today I'd like to proffer some food for thought, so to speak, for us to take some focus and consideration into psychosocial rehab and recovery as being a return to big medicine. Big medicine being a return to traditional ways and values, and a return to creation and connectedness and a feeling of holism and belonging, and that each of us are all created equal. So let's start by looking at a definition of traditional healing. The Royal Report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, it defines traditional healing as practices that are designed to promote mental health, physical and spiritual well-being, that are based on beliefs which go back to the time before the spread of Western or scientific biomedicine. When Aboriginal peoples in Canada talk about traditional healing, they include a wide range of activities, from physical cures using herbal medicines and other remedies, to the promotion of psychological and spiritual well-being using ceremony, counseling, and the accumulated wisdom of the elders. But let me as well bring greetings from Dauphin, Manitoba. Manitoba, of course, is located in the traditional territories of the Cree, Dakota, Dene, Ojibwe, and Oji-Cree First Nations, as well as the Métis Nation. Manitoba is within treaties number 1 and 2. And this is just a reflection I'd like us to start off with. It's from Chief Seattle, is that you must teach your children that the ground beneath their feet is the ashes of our grandfathers, so that they will respect the land. Tell your children that the earth is rich with the lives of our kin. Teach your children what we have taught our children, that the earth is our mother. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons of the earth. If men spit upon the ground, they spit upon themselves. This we know. The earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. This we know. All things are connected like the blood which unites one family. All things are connected. So what do we need to do sort of within this presentation? What might we give considerations to? We need to study factors that support the successful integration of traditional Aboriginal healing and Western mental health care approaches, and document the experiences of our participants and providers. And of course, holism and interconnectivity are the core foundations of traditional medicine. We need to identify gaps in awareness of how contemporary Aboriginal peoples understand and define health, how they address their health concerns, and how they perceive barriers to obtaining optimal health. This slide is a blanket. I have an extensive collection of blankets. I'm known to be a collector of lots of things, blankets in particular. I really like blankets because blankets have been used, when you think about it, for example, I still have my baby blanket from when I was a child. So blankets mark special events in people's lives, you know, the birth of a baby, so you get a baby blanket. Blankets were often given for weddings to people. They still give people blankets for wedding gifts. Blankets are often given to people for retirements. In traditional cultures, blankets are often given in ceremonies to honor people for special contributions to their community, for special milestones. So, and to me, the image or symbolism of a blanket is very important to me, because what do blankets do? They wrap around you, they nurture you, they give you comfort. And I believe that we should have more of a wraparound world. So if we could blanket the world in caring and compassion. This particular blanket and the blankets in these slides, when you see them, are they belong to, well, the blankets I'm showing are part of my personal collection, but these blankets are manufactured by Pendleton Woolen Mills in Portland, Oregon, and that is virtually the equivalent of the Hudson's Bay blanket in Canada, but of course the Hudson's Bay blankets are manufactured in England. This first blanket is called Big Medicine. It's one of my favorites. And this shows the rare white bison, which occurs only once in every 10 million births. So a bison is very sacred. It's a spirit animal. In 1933, a white buffalo was born in the wild on Montana's Flathead First Nation and was called Big Medicine to reflect his sacred power. Many Native American tribes consider the return of the white buffalo and the fulfillment of an ancient prophecy and the beginning of a new era for the peoples and Mother Earth. Tradition spoke of the coming of a herd of pure white buffalo. The 7 bison on this blanket represent the 7 directions, which are north, south, east, west, above, below, and within. Together they symbolize the wholeness for mankind and the earth. The prayer pipes on this blanket signify mankind's communication with the Creator. In the center of the blanket, within the circle of life, are 4 hands representing the diverse peoples of the world and a new beginning. Shades of brown and green reflect the natural beauty of Mother Earth. So this blanket to me speaks volumes. It's really about connectivity, holism, interconnectedness, healing, and of course looking at things from a panoramic, 3-dimensional, multifaceted perspective. And of course, oftentimes when we think, you know, what are the directions? Most people might say 4, north, east, west, and south. But in traditional values, there are 7 directions, what is above, what is below, and what is within. So it's really all-encompassing and has a larger scope. This next blanket is from my collection as well, and it's from Pendleton Woolen Mills. It represents the Elder Circle of Life. This blanket honors tribal elders. It is a reminder that we are all children of the earth, and that we share an equal place in the circle. The 4 sacred colors represent the 4 directions and humanity, and when mixed together, they create brown, the color of Mother Earth. The east represents the sun and is yellow. The south represents the warmth and vitality of lifeblood and is red. The west represents the darkness in the night sky and is black. And the north signifies the purity of snow and is white. When I first started learning about PSR, psychosocial rehab, I found it very easy to digest, and I found it very exciting because many of the teachings were very much in keeping with things that were taught to me by my grandmother. And of course, when we look at PSR, there are 4s in PSR as well, of course, looking at the arenas of living, learning, working, and social. What I'd like to propose today, or proffer for consideration, is that in many respects, and this is my personal paradigm or perspective, is that psychosocial rehab is beautiful, and it really represents for me a return to big medicine, a return to the Creator, a return to healing, and a return to caring, and a return to creating a better world, of course, with reduced stigma, greater inclusion, and collaboration, communication, and cohesion. And of course, as I mentioned, there are 4 directions in PSR. And of course, PSR promotes resilience, personal recovery, full community integration, and a sense of purpose and meaning for those who have been diagnosed with any mental health condition or an addiction issue. PSR Canada provides resources and education for supporting person-directed, recovery-oriented services across Canada. PSR is for practitioners, and I'd like to proffer that everyone, including official practitioners, can practice PSR. I'd like to proffer that PSR is for everyone. And of course, if we look at the four arenas, which are living, learning, working, socializing, and of course, PSR is client-driven, it's non-judgmental, it's hopeful, and it's empowering. And there are four phases to PSR, assessing readiness or assessing the need, looking at a diagnosis, looking at power progress, looking at interventions. Four seems to be a common theme in many things, as we will explore further. This blanket is the Crossroads Blanket, and the Crossroads design reflects First Nations teachings and the power of the four directions. The number 4 is sacred amongst many Indigenous tribes. East represents the physical body, the realm of the warrior. West represents the heart and the path of the visionary. North is the region of the mind and the wisdom of the teacher. South represents the spirit, enlightenment, and the realm of the healer. Balance and harmony are achieved where the directions meet at the center of the medicine wheel, and crosses in this Jacquard pattern symbolize the crossroads where the paths meet, the place where an individual becomes whole. So this is all about crossroads and intersections, which to me is very much in keeping and complementary with PSR and traditional First Nations values with regards to connectivity, that everyone is created equal, everyone belongs, and we are all united. There are distinctive and defining features of PSR approaches. PSR approaches, of course, build on the assessed strengths of persons rather than their deficits and problems. In other words, PSR approaches are strengths-based. They're based on the assessment of a person's strengths as the basis for individualized goal setting and recovery. This is a major difference from traditional illness-based approaches, which focus on problems and deficits. Psychosocial rehab approaches are collaborative, person-directed, and individualized as opposed to being prescriptive. They assist individuals in rediscovering skills and accessing the community resources needed to live successfully and with a self-identified quality of life. Accordingly, PSR approaches involve the client setting goals rather than the goals being set by others. PSR approaches support people to have a meaningful life and focus on the determinants of good mental health, including employment, education, social supports, basic living skills, leisure, and wellness. PSR approaches generally place persons in their chosen goal settings, such as jobs and housing, and then train and support them in those settings. Similarly, other training, such as social skills training, takes place in the person's natural environments. So PSR happens in everyday life in the real world. It does happen sometimes in an office setting, but most often PSR happens out there, on the street, so to speak. PSR approaches are supported by scientific evidence, such as effective PSR approaches, which include a number of best practices, which are strongly supported by evidence, such as employment support, or supported employment, and wellness programs, as well as promising practices with emerging evidence, such as peer support programs. And PSR approaches, of course, promote recovery and full community inclusion and integration. This blanket is called Wind and Thunder, Brothers in the Sky. And the story is that Wind and Thunder were brothers in the sky, and according to the Native American legend, long ago they quarreled when Thunder claimed he could do good on Earth without help. The wind dispersed to the Earth's far corners, leaving Thunder behind in the still air. Thunder brought mighty storms, but without the cooling wind, the air was hot and the crops failed. He could do no good alone. Thunder called, "Brother, you are nowhere. I beg you to come back for the good of the earth." The wind returned and worked with Thunder to refresh the land. In this pattern, the smaller arrows represent the movement of the wind as he scatters to the end of the world. The larger arrows show his path as he returns to work with Thunder. So this, in many respects, is an analogy, or perhaps a metaphor, or even a paradigm, so to speak, to help us to reflect. Because oftentimes in the world there are differences, there are changes in paradigms and shifts. But I'd like to proffer that Psychosocial rehab approaches in collaboration and communication in conjunction with traditional First Nations values, beliefs, structures, and archetypes. Together, they are better, they are stronger, and united we stand, so to speak, and divided, we may have some degree of challenges or animosity. This slide shows the image of a book called We Were Not the Savages, written by Daniel Paul, who's actually from New Brunswick. And he says that he knew that when he wrote this book, that the contents would cause great pain for many Canadians of English or of settler descent. Such a prediction was a certainty because the content of this book brings home discomforting facts that many of their ancestors were not always the kind, gentle folks that some historians have depicted, but were in fact perhaps barbaric in the way that they treated other humans. However, the destruction of every civilization that thrived in the Americas and the annihilation of 7 to 100 million indigenous souls by them and other European nations during their invasion speaks for itself. Resulting from these barbaric assaults against innocent people, mostly motivated by greed, each modern nation in the Americas was founded with the spilling of much First Nations people's blood. Consequently, there can be no real peace in the Americas until each of these nations acknowledges and assumes responsibility for the crimes committed against humanity by their ancestors and makes atonement to their descendants for the indescribable horrors carried out. This so much is very in keeping with the spirit of truth and reconciliation, and it reminds me of a writer that I really like and espouse from the 70s, which of course dates me. Lee Silverstein wrote a book, I believe from the 70s, called Consider the Alternatives, and there's a quote that I often use as almost my everyday mantra, which says, Lee Silverstein says in that book, yesterday's pain, today's understanding, tomorrow's hope. And that's the intent of my presentation, is not to, make disparaging remarks, towards history, and not to make any comments that are, compare religions, ideologies, one's values, beliefs, or creed. It's to create food for thought, to say, yes, we've had yesterday's pain. We need to focus on today's understanding, and we need to look at tomorrow's hope, because of course PSR is all about hope and recovery, because as we know, hope changes everything. This next slide is a book that's, I think it's still on the bestsellers list in many areas. It's by Tanya Talaga. It's called Seven Fallen Feathers. It's about racism, death, and hard truths in a northern city. In Seven Fallen Feathers, Tanya delves into the lives of 7 Indigenous students who died while attending high school in Thunder Bay over the first 11 years of this century. With a narrative voice encompassing lyrical creation myth, razor-sharp reporting, and a searing critique of Canada's ongoing colonial legacy, Talaga binds these tragedies and the ambivalent response from the police and government into a very compelling tapestry. This vivid, wrenching book shatters the air of abstraction that so often permeates news of the injustices Indigenous communities face every day. It's impossible to read Seven Fallen Feathers and not care about the lives lost, the families thrust into purgatory while the rest of society looks away. And this book, of course, was given a Writer's Trust Prize for non-fiction, a jury citation. This book is, it's often difficult to read because, of course, it's based on, reality. And, of course, it memorializes and honors the death of these 7 Indigenous students, which is most unfortunate. This is a book that I use often in terms of I do private practice work with children in care of CFS agencies locally. And this is a book that I use quite often with 12, 13, and 14-year-olds, although it appeals to a much broader audience as well. And it's called Indian Joe Blow, written by Chris Beach. And this book is intended to shed light on many of the issues that Aboriginal youth are faced with, which sends them into a downward spiral of helplessness and despair, which in turn leads them to decide oftentimes to end their lives through suicide. I believe that this book gives the reader some insight on the possibility of choice and change in order to do something positive in their lives, to improve the quality of their lives, and to truly live a good life. It will also give the reader some knowledge and understanding to the Aboriginal culture and Aboriginal teachings. This is another one of my favorite authors, Elizabeth Edwards, whose this book is about resilience, reflections on the burden and gifts of facing life's adversities. And this is one of my favorite quotes. I like quotes. So people who know me know that I like quotes. The quote, "She stood in the storm, and when the wind did not blow her way, she adjusted her sails. She didn't allow the storm to sink her ship, so to speak. She showed a great sense of resiliency and being able to, to weather the storm, of course." She also says that resilience is accepting your new reality, even if it's less good than the one you had before. You can fight it, you can do nothing but scream about what you've lost, or you can accept that and try to put something together that's good. And of course, hope and resilience to me are, if you look at the 12, which we'll look at a bit further, the 12 core principles and values of PSR, hope and resiliency stand out to me as being, paramount above all. And of course, there are 7 teachings as important PSR principles, and the 7 teachings are love, respect, honesty, trust, humility, wisdom, and courage. I would like to proffer, there are many elders that teach the 7 teachings, and there are some writers that talk about 7 teachings and more, and I would like to proffer that the 12 core principles and values of PSR, to me, encapsulate some of the more. And I believe that the 7 teachings of the grandfathers, or the 7 teachings of, sometimes they're the 7 teachings of the Anishinaabe, the 7 teachings of the Mi'kmaq, are very much in keeping and very much a great mixture with the 12 core principles and values of PSR. I think together they really mesh and they really sync. So what do we need to ask? We need to ask, what do Indigenous peoples of the world understand the nature of traditional healing to be? And how does mainstream health service delivery and policy respond to traditional healing approaches? We also need to ask, what do mainstream service providers understand the outcomes of traditional healing to be? So definitions related to Aboriginal healing practices tend to have a more holistic approach to health than the approach taken in most Western medical models. They mention spiritual and emotional issues in addition to mental and physical health. They make frequent reference to balance and/or harmony. They place emphasis often on families and communities as well as on individuals. They include references to nature or aspects of the environment, and in many cases they explicitly refer to healing from the trauma caused by aspects of colonization, such as forced removals from family and incarceration in residential schools. And in a deviation from Western models, there are many examples which mention the healing required by those who have hurt others, as well as those who have been injured. To me, this is all about the spirit of collaboration. And Romeo LeBlanc, who was a Governor General for Canada and is well known in Canadian history and politics, this is a quote from him that I rather like and I espouse. He says that we owe the Aboriginal peoples a debt that is 4 centuries old. It's their turn to become full partners in developing an even greater Canada, and the reconciliation required may be less a matter of legal text than of attitudes of the heart. And to me, a return to big medicine is a return to creation, and it's a return to a more heartfelt society that is more inclusive, more encompassing, without stigma, and where everyone is created equal, where people sit around a circle with an equal place and footing at the table, as opposed to someone being a chairperson of the board, so to speak. Maya Angelou, who's another writer that I like, she says, with regards to moving forward, that you should be angry. Oftentimes we hear that anger is such a bad thing, but she says that you should be angry, but you must not be bitter, because bitterness is like cancer. It eats upon the host. It doesn't do anything to the object of its displeasure. So use that anger. You write it, you paint it, you dance it, you march it, you vote it, you do everything about it, you talk about it, but you never stop talking. So you use the anger to move things forward in a positive trajectory, as opposed to going into the greater, deeper abyss. This also reminds me of Martin Luther King Jr., who said that human salvation lies in the hands of the creatively maladjusted. And keep in mind, it's the creatively maladjusted, not the maladjusted that would be out to create destruction. So if we look at moving lives forward, The change is in the emphasis of psychiatric rehabilitation, or psychosocial rehabilitation as we call it in Canada, to have programs and services that primarily embody to move to a more recovery-focused, person-centered approach. This approach deceptively seems very simple on the surface, but in fact it's quite complex and requires the development and use of a whole new skill set by the practitioner. It may also require unlearning or far more restraint in the use of other therapeutic modalities, such as psychodynamic or strictly clinical medical model approaches. Much has been written about the recovery-oriented approach to working with persons with serious mental illnesses, but little has been documented regarding the skills effectively needed to supervise practitioners using this model. Recovery-oriented services place a high priority and value on de-emphasizing diagnosis and pathology, and instead emphasizing the strengths approach, instilling hope, empowerment, and personal responsibility on behalf of the participant. Recovery-oriented services and interventions also place a very high value on exposing consumers to non-disabled roles and on the use of natural supports, natural environments, and natural consequences. I have this posted in my office and on my office door that says that broken crayons still color. And it's all about hope. And, you know, I believe, and I'd like to proffer or contend, that we're all a little bit broken. I think that every one of us has, to some varying degree, mental health issues, physical health issues. We all have challenges, just as well as we all have strengths. And despite that, in our brokenness, we still have a voice, we still have a color. And I'd like to think that together we're stronger, and we shouldn't look at things such, for example, as oftentimes there's a term called diagnostic overshadowing, where people are labeled as, or they see themselves as, unfortunately, oftentimes being their illness. Sometimes when I meet a participant for the first time, for example, a lady that I met just recently, I said, please tell me about yourself. Tell me, who you are. Well, I'm so-and-so and I'm schizophrenic. And I think that's very sad because, she's obviously internalized some of the societal stigma and just views herself as just being a schizophrenic. She was quite taken aback and surprised when I asked her, please tell me more about yourself. What gets you out of bed in the morning? What are your likes and dislikes? What motivates you? What motivates you? And this particular person, is very talented, very creative, and actually brings many skills and many strengths to the table. But, how often do we underestimate ourselves and just give ourselves a label? So broken crayons, of course, still color, and they color very well. These are a few quotes from Chief Joseph, who's someone that I admire quite highly. And he says that all men were made brothers. The earth is the mother of all people, and all people should have equal rights upon it. And he also says that you might as well expect the rivers to run backward as that any man who is born free should be contented when penned up and denied liberty to go where he pleases. And he says that also that it does not require many words to speak the truth. And I think what this is saying, and that's one of the beauties that I've really liked about psychosocial rehab, is that it believes in inclusion, it promotes culture and diversity, it denounces oppression, it denounces stigma, and it strives to create a better place, a better world for everyone. I believe sometimes it's attributed to the Archbishop of Durban, but to many other writers as well, who says that each of us are really angels with a broken wing, and we can only fly by embracing one another. PSR practices, and as well as traditional First Nations values, for me, encompass embracing one another in the spirit of collaboration and cooperation and cohesion, and being very collaborative as opposed to being prescriptive. And this is interesting because I was going to say, let's take a closer look at the core values and principles of PSR, but of course you'd have to take a really closer look because when I did this slide, I intended to, if you click on the bottom link, to actually go to PSR Canada's core principles and values, but you can't really see it. But of course, PSR practices convey hope and respect and believe that all individuals have the capacity for learning and growth. PSR practitioners recognize that culture and diversity are central to recovery, and we strive to ensure that all services and supports are culturally relevant to individuals receiving those services and supports. PSR practitioners engage in the process of informed and shared decision-making and facilitate partnerships with other persons identified by the individual receiving supports and services. PSR practices build on the strengths and capacities of individuals receiving those supports and services. Of course, they're person-centered, and they're designed to address the distinct needs of individuals consistent with their values, hopes, and aspirations. PSR practices promote and support full integration of people in recovery into their communities, where they can exercise their rights of citizenship, accept the responsibilities, and explore the opportunities that come with being a member of a community and a society at large. PSR practices promote self-determination and empowerment, and all individuals have the right to make their own decisions, including decisions about the types of supports and services that they receive. PSR practices facilitate the development of personal support networks by utilizing natural supports within communities, family members, as defined by the individual, peer support initiatives, and self-help and mutual help groups. PSR practices strive to help individuals improve the quality of all aspects of their lives, including social, occupational, educational, residential, intellectual, spiritual, and financial. PSR practices promote health and wellness, encourage individuals to develop and use individualized wellness plans. PSR practices support and emphasize evidence-based, promising and emerging best practices that produce outcomes that are congruent with personal recovery. PSR programs include program evaluation and continuous improvement that actively involve persons receiving services and supports. PSR practices and supports and services must be readily accessible to all individuals whenever they need them. These services and supports should be well coordinated and integrated as needed with other psychiatric, medical, and holistic treatments and practices. So once again, I'd like to proffer that the core principles and values of PSR, as well as the 7 teachings of traditional First Nations values, they really go together so well. It's like, not to sound trite, but it's like peanut butter and jelly. I'd like us to focus now on 10 tribal teachings to live by. And although I attribute these to my grandmother because they were taught to my grandmother by me, it's almost just as much as to tell someone the 10 Commandments were written by my grandmother, because these are quite common teachings, although they're very pertinent and relevant, even particularly in today's society. And you will find them oftentimes, if you go on the internet, attributed to the sacred science, to various different authors. I attribute them to my grandmother because she's the lady who taught them to me, but I'm sure she's not the original author. The first teaching, of course, is the earth is our mother. We must care for her. We must honor our ancestors through our actions. We must open our heart and soul to the Great Spirit, whoever the Great Spirit may be, from our perception or from our, our beliefs or our paradigms. We must espouse and embrace that all life is sacred and treat all beings with respect, each and every being. We must take from the earth what is needed and nothing more. We must put the good of all before our own interests. We must give constant thanks for each new day. We must speak the truth, but only of the good in others. We must follow the rhythms of nature, rise and retire with the sun. And of course, we must enjoy life's journey, but leave no tracks. It's very important, from the interconnectedness, holism, focus of PSR and traditional First Nations teaching as well, to realize that as human beings, we don't have dominion over the earth. We are actually part of the earth. We are part of the web. And, what we do to the web is actually reflective on, the entire universe, really. A famous and one of my favorite persons to listen to, I like to watch webinars often in my spare time, Tom Chi, who is an astrophysicist and one of the co-founders of Google X. My bias, my perspective is that he's brilliant. And I'm not going to play this YouTube video, and it's also available on TED Talks. But I would encourage you in your leisure, when you get the opportunity, to take some time and listen to this very illuminating gentleman. And the title of his TED Talk is Everything is Connected, Here's How. And he gives great examples and analogies. For example, our hearts are connected, our breath is connected, our minds are connected. not just by, virtue, and this isn't some sort of mysticism or some sort of, hocus pocus, or it's not, talking about ESP. We are connected scientifically by astrophysics. So when you think of, the cutting edge technology of astrophysics, and Tom Chi, who's a very brilliant astrophysicist amongst other things, it's very much in keeping with the traditional First Nations beliefs of our elders and our ancestors. It's that old adage that everything old is new again, and everything old that is perhaps new again can be new and improved. For example, the iron that is in my blood is the same as the iron that is in every human being's blood. It's the same as the iron that is in the earth. And ironically, in this particular talk or presentation by Tom Chi, he also tells us that that iron originates from the galaxy, from the stars, from basically 12 central stars. So the expression that, we are stardust, we are golden, we truly are. And interestingly enough, for example, as human beings, we live and breathe, and we don't think that we interact with the world or with the universe. The CO2 that I exhale today, generally as a rule, within 4 to 5 days, can be in China. And sometimes that's almost in as much as 48 hours and as much as 2 days if there's a tempest or a storm. Our breath is connected, of course, by virtue of photosynthesis that occurs on the earth. So the CO2 that I exhale in 4 or 5 days could actually be helping grow a plant on the other side of the world. Our minds are all connected, and I would encourage you, when you get a chance, I won't show it today because of time constraints, and of course I don't think showing a video might cause us some bandwidth issues, but take a chance, look up Tom Chi on TED Talks or on YouTube, and I'd ask you to really look at Everything is Connected, Here's How. It's quite illuminating, it's quite brilliant, and it's very much in keeping with my thoughts that PSR is very much a return to big medicine, and that interconnectedness is everywhere. Even a brilliant astrophysicist agrees that everything is connected. So sometimes when you think, like Chief Seattle, or chiefs historically, or the elders talking such talk, it really isn't so strange or so ludicrous. It's actually, in many respects, cutting edge scientific astrophysicist research. So we're looking at returning to balance and harmony. There really isn't a simple answer to the question, as medicine wheels, sometimes called hoops, because they come in more than one form, and their significance and use is often cultural specific. There is, however, one fundamental similarity besides the shape. Medicine wheels represent the alignment and continuous interaction of the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual realities. The circle shape represents the interconnectivity of all aspects of one's being, including the connection with the natural world. Medicine wheels are frequently believed to be the circle of awareness of the individual self, the circle of knowledge that provides the power that we each have over our own lives. And of course, if you look at the circle, if you look at the north, which represents air, white-skinned people, the stars, midnight, death, winter, the intellect or the mind, represents animals, and of course represents sweetgrass. The west represents the earth, or dark-skinned people. It's dusk, maturity, autumn, the physical body, humans, and sage. The south represents water, red-skinned people, the moon, noon, birth, summer, the spiritual or soul, plants, and cedar. The east represents fire, yellow-skinned people, the sun, dawn, growth, spring, emotional health and healing, minerals, and tobacco. So I really like this symbolism. It means a lot to me. And when oftentimes, when I first started learning about PSR, I think this is about the medicine wheel. Well, perhaps in many respects it is. And of course, when you look at the 4 directions of the medicine wheel, and of course technically the 4 directions in PSR: living, learning, working, and social. This is another blanket from my collection. And of course, most people are familiar with the North Star, or Stella Maris, the Star of the Sea. It's a name given to the North Star by sailors who've used it as a guiding light for as long as man has traveled the sea. This is a very beautiful blanket, and the graduated palette of indigo, lapis, royal, and ivory unfolds in a dynamic chevron pattern that evokes the emanation of starlight in the night sky, and it recalls the traditional craft of making star quilts. The designer of this particular blanket is Alyssa Phoebus Mumtaz. She's an American artist, and she's known for her multimedia drawings that are inspired by iconography of traditional textiles. Her work is exhibited worldwide and has been recognized by numerous fellowships and grants. When I think of Stella Maris or Guiding Light, it caused me to give some consideration or thought to what is our Stella Maris as PSR practitioners and advocates and promoters of PSR. So I think of the core competencies of PSR as really encapsulating our Stella Maris or Guiding Light. And the core competencies are Stella Maris from the 2017 core competencies of PSR they've been updated, and they are as follows, or they include diversity and inclusion, professional skills, PSR, supporting practices and recovery-oriented services, equity and social participation, and facilitating change and providing leadership. And Dr. John Higginbottom, who of course is well known to PSR, in an email or PSR promotional awareness that I received not too long ago, he stressed that the PSR team feels that it's really important that practitioners strengthen their skills in evidence-based practices such as cognitive remediation, assertive community treatment or the ACT approach, CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, and also supportive employment. So these encapsulate really some of the core competencies and really our Stella Maris, our guiding light, our guiding star, so to speak, as we promote and practice and share the illumination that PSR proffers to each and every one of us. Dr. Higginbottom also says that each practitioner of PSR is a leader in their own right. And he said that we want to acknowledge that PSR practitioners are leading a significant change in the way we support people with mental and addiction issues. And if you're doing this work, you're a change agent, you are a champion. And it takes a movement of like-minded people to see systems transformation come into being, a community of people who together provide support, accountability, encouragement, education, and a springboard for innovative ideas. And you can be a leader in this movement. Each and every one of us can. PSR, of course, is about hope. And I said, hope lives here. There are many different paths that people can take on their recovery journey, but every single path begins with hope. And I've taken this from PSR Canada's website because I really like the image and the message, that hope is born in the stillness of a movement when one, ever so slightly, begins to believe that they might be able to experience relief, happiness, satisfaction, connection, and joy. And when I think about hope, it reminds me of a saying that my grandmother would say, and I'm sure she's not the author of it, but she used to always say that we should always pray to have eyes that see the best, a heart that forgives the worst, a mind that forgets the bad, and a soul that never loses faith. And she'd also say that may we always pay more attention to our Creator than to our critics. May we always have hope. Because without hope, there really isn't much, but of course with hope, hope changes everything. Once again, Chief Joseph says that all men were made by the same Great Spirit, Chief. They are all brothers. The earth is the mother of all people, and all people should have equal rights upon it. And I think this is very, this is very PSR from my perspective, because it's talking about the elimination of stigma, social inclusion, equality and equity, respect for culture and diversity. Many of the First Nations teachings just resonate with me from a PSR perspective. There are 7 directions. Of course, they're north, east, west, and south, above, below, and within. And what I'm going to do next is not necessarily to make a comparative, it's not a comparative study of religion, and I certainly don't want to offend anyone's, values, beliefs, or creeds. It's to basically show that everything is connected, that there truly is an interconnectedness, whether we believe it or not. If we open our eyes to other people's ideas and, try to be aware of our values and biases, as much as we're all different, we really, in many respects, are so very much all the same. The Native American religion and the beliefs of the Jewish people and Christians as well share many things in common. On first look, they portray God's creation in two very different and separate ways. But once they are both studied, similarities and a common ideology can be readily seen. The Jewish and Christian religions believe that God created everything in 6 days and rested on the seventh. They believe he created everything from light and dark to plants, animals, and humans. The Native Americans believe that God's creation can be represented in 7 directions. The 4 polar directions, which are north, east, west, and south, plus above, below, and within. Each direction represents a different piece of God's creation, race, and generation. There are 2 common themes that jump out above all the rest. The first is the use of the number 7. The number 7, along with the numbers 12 and 40, are thought to be holy numbers in the Jewish, Christian, and Native American religions. The second is the importance of God's creation. Both religions revere God's creation and believe that it is all sacred. Both of these religions tell the same story, but in a different perspective, and to a different audience. The creators of each of the stories had their audience in mind while creating these stories, which form a large base to their respective religions or beliefs. The writers use principles, objects, and other things that their audiences wouldn't understand and take to heart. That they would understand and take to heart, not that they wouldn't. The purpose of both is to have their audience understand that God's creation needs to be respected and is holy. So even though there are differences, there are so many commonalities. And this is not to proselytize or to preach, although it's from Isaiah 40, verse 31. It's an eagle. And the quote from Isaiah 40:31 is, "Those who hope in the Lord, or in the Creator, or in whoever you believe in your higher power, will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint." I've always found it interesting, the significance of the eagle that seems to cross so many generations and so many cultures, be it traditional First Nations, Aboriginal cultures, our fellow country, our brother below us, the United States of America. The eagle is significant in so many ways. And when you think of elders, so for example, oftentimes if you find an eagle feather, you should take it to an elder who will bless it and sometimes keep it, or maybe they'll give it back to you. Or the significance of a feather is sometimes you pass a feather when you're in a meeting from person to person to show respect, to give that person a chance to have a voice, to share their opinions, concerns, or their hopes, values, and aspirations. So, and the other thing I really like about eagles, if you study eagles, which I'm certainly no expert on, I'm not an expert on anything by any means, but when there's a storm and the eagle has no place to land, the eagle will rise above the storm and hover over the storm until the storm has cleared, and then will find a safe place. And eagles have so many powers in so many ways. They're very interesting creatures. And of course, eagles and birds as well represent the connection between us here on Earth and our Creator, in the heavens. So I really am amazed, that we'll soar like eagles on eagles on wings like eagles. And not to be biblical, I'm not preaching the Bible by any means today, but just the significance of the commonality of the eagle. Because just think about it, years ago, when the settlers first came to North America and thought, who are these strange people that practice strange ways, that talk to animals and place such a high value on eagles? And for example, North America is known as Turtle Island. Because it just goes back, and it goes almost without saying, and I'm saying it again because I'd like to repeat it, that everything is connected. We are all connected. We are all equal. This is from Ancient Origins. It's reconstructing the story of humanity's past, and it's also it's on lots of websites. And this, to me, it's a Navajo Hopi prophecy, and it speaks to a better world, a more compassionate, more humane, more inclusive, collaborative world where everyone has a voice, and the palettes of each of us brings a different color or a palette to the world. So it's the sharing of colors. It's sort of the rainbow of people, and it's also called the rainbow prophecy. And I think it's very much in keeping, of course, with traditional values and beliefs because it's Navajo and Hopi, but also very much in keeping with PSR, because PSR strives to create a much better world and to envision and help us move towards a world of greater inclusion. So the prophecy is that there will come a day when people of all races, colors, and creeds will put aside their differences. They will come together in love, joining hands in unification to heal the earth and all her children. They will move over the earth like a great whirling rainbow, bringing peace, understanding, and healing everywhere they go. Many creatures thought to be extinct or mythical will resurface at this time. The great trees that perished will return almost overnight, and all living things will flourish, drawing sustenance from the breast of our mother, the earth. The great spiritual teachers who walked the earth and taught the basics of the truths of the whirling rainbow prophecy will return and walk amongst us once more, sharing their power and understanding with all. We will learn how to see and hear in a sacred manner. Men and women will be equals in the way the Creator intended them to be. All children will be safe everywhere they go. Elders will be respected and valued for their contributions to life. Their wisdom will be sought out. The whole human race will be called the people, and there will be no more war, sickness, or hunger forever. And I think this prophecy is, to me, it's more than a beautiful thought, or it's more than just a wishful, hopeful dream. It's more than fantasy. I think it's possible, because if we switch our paradigm and our thinking, currently I believe that we live in a world that we're so busy keeping up with the Joneses. We have so much technology, laptops, computers, cell phones, and I often find, sadly enough, we have oftentimes we've lost our ability to communicate, to collaborate, and to show each other love, caring, and compassion. We seem to have gotten caught in some sort of a competitiveness, or not to make any grand political statements or denounce capitalism, but we've become a world where we want to compete with one another. And really, what we should be doing is competing with ourselves. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I have trouble with that word, as we strive towards self-actualization, really what we should be doing, what I should be doing, and I'd like to infiltrate the thoughts and minds of everyone else, we should be heading towards self-actualization to become the best that we can be, to become more human, to become more humane, and that to me would help us to head towards fulfilling this prophecy. I believe that we can make the world a better place by not keeping up with the Joneses, but striving each day to keep up with ourselves, but also keeping the spirit of collaboration and communication and cohesion. And I think that's very much in keeping with the interconnectedness of everything. And I believe that PSR plays a vital role, because PSR infusions and also traditional First Nations infusions will help head us on that trajectory, or that path towards optimal hope and wellness. Justice Sinclair, or Senator Sinclair, who's been on the forefront and paramount in terms of the Truth and Reconciliation Inquiry and Recommendations, says that we have described for you a mountain. We have shown you the path to the top. We call upon you to do the climbing. And I think that PSR will help us to climb. It'll help us not just climb mountains, but to move mountains. Chief Dan George, this is a quote from him that says, "May the stars carry away your sadness. May the flowers fill your heart with beauty. May hope forever wipe away your tears. And above all, may silence make you strong." National Chief Perry Bellegarde from the Assembly of First Nations urges Canadians to make space in their hearts for Aboriginal peoples as a step on the road towards reconciliation. He says that we need to rid ourselves of those racist attitudes, the discriminatory attitudes, those images of Indigenous peoples as being substandard and pagan and savage. We need to rid ourselves of those racial stereotypes of Indians and Indigenous people being dumb and lazy and drunk and on welfare. We need to rid ourselves of those things so new things can come in. Respect for our languages, our customs, and our traditions, that we are equally as important as human beings. And I think PSR doesn't make political statements, and I'm not trying to make political statements, but PSR promotes culture and diversity, integration, and the integrity of each and every one of us. And I'd like to say again that we are all broken crayons, but we can all color. And let's color away and let's color the world better. This is another quote from Chief Dan George. You can tell that I like this gentleman. If you talk to the animals, they will talk to you, and you will know each other. If you do not talk to them, you will not know them, and what you do not know, you will fear. What one fears, one destroys. Now that can be said applicable as well to, historical events within Canada, to colonization, and also, of course, it speaks loud volumes to xenophobia, because oftentimes what we don't fear, what we don't know about, we condemn, criticize, and chastise, and alienate, and oftentimes we actually literally do destroy what we fear. This is a reflection on the spirit of sharing and respect, which is very traditional and is very much from a First Nations perspective. And sharing and respect, to me, is very in keeping with the core principles and values of PSR. Once you give an idea to a council or to a meeting, it no longer belongs to you. It belongs to the people. Respect demands that you listen intently to the ideas of others and that you do not insist that your idea prevails. Indeed, you should freely support the ideas of others if they are true and good, even if those ideas are quite different from the ones that you've contributed. The clash of ideas brings forth a spark of truth. This reminds me of, for example, our Canadian or North American justice system is the clash or the sharing of ideas. So, for example, if you go to court, there's the Crown prosecutor who represents the Crown. There's the defense who represents the person being charged. So it's basically point, counterpoint, innocent, guilty. And that to me is also in keeping with, say, for example, if we were going to go to, a very elite rabbinical college, for example, in Syracuse, New York, it's point, counterpoint. And that's how the students would learn, is that, for example, if you were a student in my class, you would take a stance that was pro-abortion. For example, I would take a stance against or pro, LGBT, other, person's lives. I always forget the whole string, but, towards, other kinds of people as opposed to being those kinds of people. This spirit of sharing and respect creates less of an us and them paradigm or mentality. It focuses more on we, because together we are better, together we are stronger, together we can make this world a much better place. Sorry. So if we go back to sort of the idea, the construct of the medicine wheel, onwards and upwards, and I keep repeating that we need to treat all men alike, or Chief Joseph keeps repeating it by via of my quoting him, to treat all men alike, give them the same law, give them an even chance to live and grow. So what do we need to do? We need to resist who we are not. We need to act. What are our responsibilities? There's an elder in Winnipeg that I've heard saying that we are all responsible, and even more so, I like her term. She says that we are all response-able. So each and every one of us, by virtue of being part of the universe, by being part of humankind, we have an obligation to embrace one another. We need to reclaim where we've come from, and we need to reconstruct or construct where we are going, which is very much in keeping with, say, for example, the quote that I mentioned earlier by Lee Silverstein with regards to yesterday's pain, today's understanding, tomorrow's hope. And of course, hope changes everything. And this is a quote from a writer, Arundhati Roy, that I very much like and embrace. And she says that another world is not only possible, but she's on the way. And on a quiet day, if you listen very carefully, you can hear her breathe. So if we get in touch with creation, get in touch with, Mother Earth and, Father Creator, if we get in touch with the core principles and values of PSR, I think that we are heading on the path, or we're already on the path towards hope. And of course, we need to be more collaborative, more integrative, and to share our differences, perhaps agree to disagree, and also embrace culture and diversity, embrace our commonalities, because, whether you're looking at things from a traditional First Nations Aboriginal perspective or from a PSR perspective, or whether you're looking at things from the perspective of very brilliant astrophysicists such as Tom Chi, everything is connected. We are all the same. What we need to focus on is the here's how and the strategic planning with regards to how to move life forward in the spirit of conviviality and collegiality. At this juncture, I'm going to stop speaking, and I hope that people are still awake. I hope I haven't caused people to fall asleep, and I would like to perhaps give an opportunity. I'll let Regina take over. Maybe we can have an opportunity for some questions or clarification or collaboration. If there's something I said that didn't make sense or that people wish to question, I'm open, because I actually, not that I wish to cause dissension by any terms, but I like it when people disagree with me or show me a different vision or a different perspective, because in the spirit of sharing and caring, that's how we move forward. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation today, and I hope that it made sense, and I hope that it causes some food for thought and some sparks of illumination for all of us.
So, James, it is our great pleasure and mine to say a big thank you. I think that really your message for me is about making the world a better place, James, and you certainly help us make this world a better place. You propel me to be a better person, and I think that that's a real measure of advancing our sense of humanity, as you spoke about. So I deeply thank you for that, James, and we see that on some of the chat here, people are saying that I love this, and that another comment being that we always want to categorize things and even put ideas or philosophies into boxes. And when I think about you, James, and I've known you just for a couple of years now, but I see you as almost like a little magpie in some ways. You have these ideas and philosophies, but I think what you help us do is to consider how they all kind of fit together, James. So your large, grand perspective of thinking about how psychosocial rehabilitation fits with other ways of being and other ways of teaching resonates with my own Irish heritage and my dad. So I'm sitting here listening to you, kind of half listening to my father as well, so that's an unusual and quite a lovely experience for me personally. But I love how you bring that together, and I know that in some respects it's courageous, and we haven't done that too much as a PSR community. So I'm thankful, and I think sometimes the language we use in doing this can just cause emotions for people that can bring together and sometimes pull apart. So I think that sometimes there's an opportunity for some deeper listening that sometimes we all need to do. So I just appreciate you for bringing us on this journey today. So thank you kindly. Yes, joining the dots, as Alice say, in such a beautiful way. So thank you for that, and thanks for Alice for helping me articulate that. So, as James says that he's open for comments, I promised to give you a little bit of an update on something that's going on, so I'm just going to do that, I hope, right now. So this is just changing the topic a little bit, but maybe it'll give you a moment to formulate your thoughts and questions for James. But it's just in support of some work by Victoria Maxwell, who many of you will likely know as well, and a project going on in White Rock that you may be interested. So I just leave details there, and I promised a Fraser Health Authority colleague that I would just do that advertisement. So I just want to do what I said I was going to do. So thank you for that. Always be welcoming and engaging in empowerment, James adds as well. So Jenny adds that it's very informative and found it interesting and educational. Great job. And I totally concur. Just trying to think about those ideas and philosophies and pulling them together for us in your creative way, I think really helps us advance that dialogue. And I heard so many voices as you were talking about us being, more deeply human. I'm thinking too about Patricia Deegan, somebody that we speak a lot about with such great experience and power to teach us, I think, from very much a PSR and recovery perspective. So. Yeah, so Jenny says the members and I are all proud of you. That's got to feel nice and fuzzy and warm, James. So that's really great. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
And maybe I'll just start off some of the comments or questions. But when we were reading some of the quotations, I'm thinking of one in particular about Chief Joseph, who spoke about, men being equal, and I assume there's some sense of that it was men and women, and just sense of that equality, and I just want to say that in case somebody was thinking about that the same way I was, but my sense is that, and I don't know if you want to speak to that, James, but...
I think when he says that all men are equal, that certainly also includes women as well, because as many might know, in traditional First Nations values, the women were the carriers of the messages, the tellers of the social stories, and oftentimes in some traditional First Nations cultures, it would be the women in the community that would see promise or potential in a young person, so to speak. Oftentimes it was a young boy, although women can be chiefs in these days, thankfully, that they would groom this boy and teach him the ways of the earth, the ways of the universe, the way of compassion, and they would groom that young person to become a chief. So traditionally in many First Nations cultures, it was the women who actually taught the values, beliefs, and the compassion and caring. And I'd also like to thank you as well, Regina, for your comment. And we do have some commonality. Of course, I realize that you're Irish. I'm 23% Irish. I'm a very much mixed ancestry. Oftentimes people perceive me as being a settler, but I'm 54% Native American, 23% Irish, 8% Great British, 13% Asian, 1% Northwest Russian, Finland, and 1% Scandinavian. So I think I'm like United Nations, and even in terms of my DNA.
That's just, yeah. I love how you just have this encyclopedia of your background. It's really amazing. Just want to add to Carmen's thought as well, but thank you so much. So impressed and excited by your knowledge and enthusiasm, and by just that wealth as well, James, of what you bring to us, and the challenge you put on the table for us as well, to really, I think, bring our best selves to work as well, James, to consider this human that we're working with, who's really giving to us just as much as we are providing for that individual in terms of that therapeutic exchange. So, yeah.
The Ram Dass once said that we are all on a journey back home, and we're all sort of walking each other back home. And I think we have an obligation as we journey back home is to support one another. And as I've written on the chat screen, we should always be welcoming, be engaging, and be empowering. And I think if we're always doing those three things, being welcoming, engaging, and empowering, then we are practicing PSR in everyday life.
I just want to say a thank you from one of our teammates here who was excited to see the representation of PSR Canada in your slides as well. So Jen is here beside me, and she was the author of the slide that you just attributed to PSR Canada, rightly so. But Jen got pretty excited when she saw that stuff. And I guess I just wanted to bring that up because, sometimes in our midst there are these shiny, bright, wonderful things that help guide our way. And I think you're just an expert at picking those up and helping us ponder them again and bring them into our lives. So thank you for that. Just leave the chat open. You're welcome. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I was just going to say I was going to leave the chat open for 1 more or 2 more minutes just to see if anybody has any final questions or comments. Go ahead, James. Over to you.
I would never espouse to be an expert in any arena. I think I follow the beliefs of Socrates or Plato, who basically would say that all that I know is that I know nothing. And for example, when I did attain the certification in PSR, I think to me it symbolizes not that I'm an expert, but that I'm committed to ongoing learning each and every day and to sharing. So I feign no expertise.
Well, I think for any academic listening to this as well, when I was sort of prompted by your quotation of that once we put an idea out into the world, that it becomes the property of the community. And being in academic circles for a little while, I think that's a bit of a change of thinking, because I guess, yeah, that's just a different currency sometimes in that particular context. But yeah, just interesting. Yeah. Cool.
When I lived in Peru a few years ago, the Quechua family that I stayed with, who are First Nations people from Peru, they define richness by having a pretty heart and being caring. So the mark of a successful or rich person is one who shares their caring and their knowledge. And I think we need to change the world to have that sort of a trajectory, that your richness is not necessarily your house or your Mercedes or whatever in the driveway. It's your richness is in how we journey.
That's lovely, James. That's lovely. Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for that. I see Cinnamon's just typing, so we'll just give her a little moment to finish that thought. Yeah. Oh, we lost James' camera. That's all good. And just maybe in the meantime, maybe I'll just switch on my camera to say goodbye to everybody. But just a small reminder that we have our upcoming webinar on hearing voices. So we're very excited about that. So please stay tuned for that, and hopefully you'll sign up for it. We have some wonderful expertise and voices from that movement that I think have a lot to add in terms of opportunities we offer people in mental health settings. Excellent. So, Cinnamon says, thank you, James. Wonderful and insightful. Jenny says, have a wonderful weekend, everybody. And James just adds that you're more than welcome and thanks for journeying. So perhaps on that note, we'll leave it there and we'll say thank you so much. I know, James, you worked very hard to pull all this material together for us. So we're very, very grateful. And thanks to you for attending the session today, everybody who's on the call. Thank you. And we hope to see you very soon at our next presentation on hearing voices. And bye for now. From Manny, from Jen, myself, from James, and wish you a happy weekend. Bye for now.